Our Melba, what was this called? My mind just went totally blank. Hey you guys, welcome back to my channel. I have a very fun video for you guys today. We are talking all about blushes today. We're going to be doing an old blush tag that went around a long time ago. We'll be talking all about packaging, colors, formulas, best and worst, favorite, least favorite, all things blush. So if you are a blush lover, I hope you will enjoy this video. Before we jump into it, if you are new here, welcome. I hope that you enjoy this video. If you do, be sure to hit that subscribe button and ring that bell so that you can be notified every time I upload a new video. And now let's go ahead and get into the tag. So this video idea actually came from one of you guys. One of you left a comment before I started my full month of nothing new suggesting that I do the blush tag video, and I read that comment and thought, is there a blush tag going around? Did I miss something? So I did a little bit of digging, I did a little bit of research, and the only blush tag that I could see happening, at least in the title, was one that went around about 4 years ago, which happens to be a year before I started my YouTube channel. I am sure that back then I watched a lot of those videos because I was watching beauty content before I was creating it. So I went back and watched a few of those videos like Emelina Wells and came up with the list. I don't exactly know who started this blush tag video 4 years ago, but I will link some of the ones that I really enjoyed down below. Now these are older videos, but it's actually kind of fun to go back and see what was hot 4 years ago. But we're going to do it from my 2020 perspective today, starting with best packaging. This one was tricky because I have quite a few that I think could compete for this category, but I ended up going with the Flower Beauty blushes. I really do love these blushes. I own two of them in the shades Warm Hibiscus and Peach Primrose. I think they're a great formula, but I love the packaging because it combines two of my favorite things, sleekness and beauty. These are really, really beautiful and adorable. They do have that kind of flower imprint on the front. You can see they're starting to wear down a little bit because I do use these quite often. This one is very, very worn down. But I also love that the packaging is sleek and pretty minimal. They don't take a lot of room to store. They stack very well amongst some of my other blushes, but they're also really beautiful to look at. I almost went with the Milani Rose blushes, but those ones are just a little bit large and bulky, and I kind of prefer the sleekness of these ones. Ironically, one of the ones that I wanted to include is one that is completely the opposite as far as what I typically like in packaging, which is something that is kind of sleek and minimal, and it's this right here. This is the Lovely Cookie blusher. I got this from YesStyle several months ago. Normally a package like this that is not very sleek and is actually very awkward to store. I mean, it kind of actually reminds me of like Physicians Formula packaging, which I'm kind of always giving them a hard time, but this one is just so cute that I seem to give this one a pass for basically violating all of my packaging preference rules. I don't know what it is, if it's just this cute, clear, milky plastic top or this powder puff inside, but when I open up my blush drawer and I see this sitting inside, even if I'm not using it, it brings a smile to my face. It makes me feel like a kid again, which who doesn't want to feel like a kid again, no matter what your age is? So I wanted to mention this as kind of an honorable mention. I would say this is more of like a collector's kind of packaging item. I think this appeals to like the makeup collector in me because it is just so kind of old school and cute looking. But for the practical side of me, which almost always wins over, gotta go with the Flower Beauty. Next category is Prettiest Color, and I have two blushes in this category. Both of these come from YesStyle. One is that one that I just talked about. This is from the brand Etude House, the Lovely Cookie blusher, and this specific shade is the color Strawberry Shoe. This is a very unique shade to my collection. As you can see when I turn it to the side, it looks very, very bubblegum Barbie kind of pink. The average kind of everyday person might look at this and be a little bit intimidated by it, and I put myself into this category, but I've learned that this type of a color used with a light hand just on the apples of your cheeks in combination with your bronzer and your highlight can give you the prettiest pop of pink that I think is absolutely beautiful pretty much any time of the year. It's perfect and bright and fun in the springtime. It also adds a nice pop of color on the cheeks when you do have a little bit more tan or if you have deeper skin tone. And in the winter, a shade like this gives you such a just out of the cold kind of healthy flush that I just think is so beautiful. But another one I'm going to mention for Prettiest Color is this one right here. This is from the brand Sugar Ball. This is their cushion cheek color in the shade Daisy Coral. You guys, this shade is so unique. I don't know that the lights and the camera are going to do it justice here. It reminds me of a peach that has this like milky, bright, slightly pink quality to it that I think is so fun and beautiful. This is the color I am wearing on my cheeks today. It just has this subtle, bright quality while still being light and kind of milky. I know those are all very contradictory descriptions of this blush. It's just a very unique and pretty color. I have nothing in my collection that looks like this, but every time I put this on my cheeks, I just think, wow, That is so beautiful. Next category is most pigmented, and for that I'm going to go with this right here. This is the e.l.f. Primer Infused Shimmer Blush. This one is in the shade Always Lucky. This does look very, very bright. I got this in the mail and I thought, oh boy, that's probably not one I'm going to use very often. A part of me thought maybe I should pass this thing along, but this I imagine is going to be a beautiful fall shade. I'm definitely going to have to use a light hand with it when I use it, or combine it with another blush that I'll be talking about in a little bit here. But I just love the red kind of berry tone to this. This is not a shade I own a lot of in my collection, but especially in the fall or winter, this just reminds me of like a cold weather kind of blush when used with a light hand. So I am going to keep this. I haven't used it a lot yet, but I do have intentions to pull this thing into some beautiful fall looks. The next category is Everyday Blush, and for that one I'm going to go with Melba by MAC. This is such an OG blush. I have had this one myself for many, many years, probably about 6 years now, which is hard to believe because I have used this thing a lot and there's a very, very small dent in it. You don't need a lot of this product. I would say if you have medium to deep skin tone, this probably won't show up on you very well, but if you have anywhere from a lighter medium to a very, very fair skin tone, I think this is a beautiful everyday blush. I talk about it a lot. I compare other blushes to the shade. It's one of those blushes that I feel goes with absolutely anything, any time of year, any type of look, whether you're doing something warm or cool. It has a little bit of warmth, but also a little bit of a cool pink to it. It's subtle, but it's not too subtle. It's matte, but it goes on very creamy and smooth. I just love this one. It's such a classic. One of my all-time favorite blushes that I continue to use quite often. And after all these years and all the blushes I've tried over the years, this still stands out to me as the perfect everyday blush. Next category is Party Blush. I was a little bit confused by this category. I kind of thought to myself, one, what does that mean? Two, I am not much of a party goer at all, unless you count family or company Christmas parties or my kids' like school parties, and I really don't think much about the blushes I wear to those. But thinking of those few times a year, and literally 2 times a year I go to a Christmas party, or imagining that my life was a little bit more glamorous than it actually is, there are 2 blushes that I think I would wear to a party, and it would be these 2 right here. This one is the Collab Just for Fun blush. The reason I picked this one is because it is a very unique, soft, cool-ish pink that's not too cool or too bright. It almost has like a purpley shift to it, but it's, I can't explain it. It's a very unique, dusty, pinky purple is how I would describe it. It looks so pretty on the cheeks. I absolutely love it. It goes with anything, especially a cooler tone, kind of smokier eye. But if I'm doing a look that's very warm, I would go with this blush right here. This is NARS Madly. Such a beautiful blush. Very, very blah looking in the pan, but so pretty on the cheeks. If you have a light to medium skin tone, I would say if you're medium to deep, this is not going to be a blush for you. It probably will not show up on you because it is quite light and fair. But I do love this NARS formula. I mean, as you can see, you can barely see that there, but it just shows up in the most subtle and beautiful way. It has the very subtlest of sheens to it that I think is so pretty. Just the right amount of color, especially if I'm doing a dramatic eye. And if I'm going to a party, guys, 9 times out of 10, I'm going to do something dramatic on the eyes and keep the cheeks kind of subtle. So those would be my picks for a party blush. The next one is blushes that I regret purchasing. This was hard for me because I rarely regret, especially blush purchases. There are times I regret eyeshadow palette purchases, but it's pretty rare for me, number one, to spend a lot on a blush. So most of the time, even if a blush doesn't work out too well for me, if I didn't spend a lot of money, I'm kind of okay with it, which is a terrible attitude, I admit. But if I had to pick one, I'd have to go with these 2 right here. These are from Folklore Cosmetics. These are their blush duos that are meant to kind of mimic or dupe the Cover FX blushes. I think these look really pretty. I mean, in the pan, they look beautiful. I've used them each a handful of times. I just don't reach for these very often. Every time I see these sitting in my drawer or think about them, I think, ugh, I really need to force myself to use those. But then I have to ask myself, why is it that I feel like I need to force myself to use these? Like, what is it about these that I just am not reaching for? And I honestly don't 100% know, but I think it might have something to do with the packaging of them because they are a little bit large. Because when I open these, I have to think about, well, do I want a shimmer? Do I want something more matte? Do I want to mix them both together? But also the 2 colors that I ended up getting. This one is very, very, very peachy, almost orange and warm tone. I feel like this is a blush that doesn't go with every look. Like, it's a blush that's meant to have the rest of my makeup planned around, and I just don't do that very often. And I almost feel the same way about this one. This one I think is a little bit more me, a little bit more neutral, but it's just a little bit deep for me. I have to be a little bit more light-handed and careful with this, and I just when I have other blushes that I prefer, I just don't reach for these enough. And for that reason, even though they weren't that expensive, if I could go back in time and not hit the buy button on one or some of these would probably be the ones. Next up, the least used blush or blushes in my collection. For that, I'm going to go with my e.l.f. blushes. These old e.l.f. blushes is what I'm specifically talking about. Now, technically, this one has officially been decluttered. It's sitting in my little declutter bin from my blush declutter that I did last week or the week before, but I wanted to pull it back into this video because this blush is seriously old. I bought this back when I lived in Virginia 11 years ago. Late 2009 this blush goes back to, which that's old. And that's the biggest reason I don't use this and haven't used it for years, because it's just been old. I should have decluttered it a long time ago, but I'm just not a very organized person, I'm sorry to say. But I also have this quad here. I do think these quads are really beautiful. Now, these are quite old as well, which is one of the reasons I don't use them that much anymore. But I still think these are really pretty. I don't think the formula in these, and granted, this is an older one. I believe they do still sell these. I'll double check, but I bought this specific one about 7 years ago. So I don't know if the formula has changed since then. I think they're beautiful. They go on really well. The colors are so pretty. I don't think that they last super well on me though. I think blush formulas in general have come a long way. I think the ones that I have that are newer, whether they be drugstore or high-end, tend to last a little bit better on me. But I do hold on to this thing mainly for sentimental reasons. It just reminds me of old school YouTube. But I definitely don't use this very often. It's been, I think, over a year since I've reached for this thing. Next category is my most used blush, or the blush that I would never let go of. That has got to be my Juicy Pang Water Blusher. You guys are probably so sick of hearing me talk about this thing, but I cannot get enough of this. If you have dry or mature skin, give these, really any cream or liquid blush I would say this about, but especially these. There's something about these that just plumps up my cheeks in the most healthy and beautiful way. I've raved and raved about this one. One of you recently let me know that you can actually buy these on Amazon, which I really want to pick up a few more shades. September 1st, you better believe I will be ordering a few more of these. I have the shade Guava. I know it does not look like much here, but I'm just telling you guys, this like glossy texture on your cheeks looks so good. And for how plump and liquidy and glossy it is, it actually lasts really well on me, which is so surprising considering its texture. But I can't get enough of this thing. It has been my favorite for well over a month, and I continue to just want to reach for this thing every single day. Next category is my favorite blush brand. I had to pick two for this one. I have a very favorite drugstore and a favorite high-end. For my favorite drugstore brand, it's got to be, let me get them facing the right way, Essence blushes. I love these guys. They are so affordable, $2.99. But that is not why I love these. I mean, that's a big reason. But even if these were, say, $8 or $9 or $10, the formula would be worth that price because they are just so good. These three right here are their newer ones. These are the blush blushes. You can get these at Ulta as well as on the Essence website. And one of you did mention that they do sell Essence at some CVS's. So check CVS if you have one of those near you. I'm such a fan of these, especially these two shades right here. I love the shade Befitting and the shade Blooming. This is such a good shade. I know I've said this a few times, but if you have a deep blush, such as this e.l.f. blush right here, this is a perfect blush to mix in with another blush that you maybe want to lighten up a little bit. It has such a beautiful texture to it. And even on its own, as fair as this is, it does still kind of show up on my skin as a little bit of a blush. It's going to be a subtle blush. And if you have medium to deep skin, I mean, this might just be a highlight on you. But if you have very fair skin, I'm talking porcelain fair skin, and you find blush to be very difficult because so many are just too pigmented for you and you feel like they make you look like a clown, this is the one I would go for because it is so beautiful, so soft, and so very light. I also still love their Satin Touch blushes. You can buy these online, and one of you did mention you found these in your CVS. I have the shades Satin Coral and Satin Love. Satin Love is my favorite shade, but they're actually a little bit similar. This one just has a little bit more of a peach tone to it, and this one more of a neutral kind of pink tone to it. Both are quite light, and they do not have a shade range in really any of their blushes, so that is definitely one thing that I should mention. For those of you that do have deeper skin tones, I don't know that at least these two shades will work on you. I do think these shades might work on more of a medium skin tone because they are quite pigmented, the shade Befitting and the shade Bespoke. This one is quite shimmery though, so be aware of that. Let me just swatch it for you guys. It's almost like a bronzer, but it has a little bit of rosiness to it, but will probably only show up on medium to fair skin. But I also had to mention my MAC blushes for my favorite blush brand. I love MAC blushes. I think they're a really great formula. They're very classic, old school, not just old school YouTube, but I mean just classic old school makeup. Like if you went to high school in the 90s or early 2000s, you probably remember like the girls that would wear MAC makeup in high school. I was not one of them, by the way. These just have a nostalgic quality to them that is so enjoyable to me, and they are really good blushes. I think their formula is really, really nice. The three shades I have are Melba, which I already talked about. I also really love these two right here. I have Margin, which this I think has maybe been discontinued. This specific blush I've had for an embarrassingly long time, but I really, really love this shade. It's a very kind of bronzy, shimmery peach that is just so pretty and flattering. It actually reminds me a tiny bit of Madly by NARS. And then this shade right here is Modern Mandarin. Very nice, bright orange. Not one that I use super often because it's very much a statement kind of blush. Like I feel like this is the type of blush that I would center the rest of my makeup look around because I don't know that this goes with everything, but it is really fun and really pretty. All around, just great blushes. Love the formulas. They're very nice and buildable, which I always love in a blush. And add to that the nostalgia factor, and they would have to be one of my favorites. Next category, the greatest blush discovery of the last year. For this one, I'm going to go with kind of a category. If I did have to pick one specific blush, I have to go with the Juicy Pang blusher. But in general, I'm going to say cream and liquid blushes. Kind of the end of last year, the beginning of this year was really when I started to try out and fall in love with cream and liquid blushes. But a couple specific ones I want to mention besides the Juicy Pang, the Bare Minerals Bounce and Blur blush, another fantastic blush discovery this last year. My Nude Sticks blush stick in the shade Sunkissed. I love this one so much. This is such a pretty color. It's a very kind of bronzy rose. It's very interesting. It's almost cool toned and warm toned at the same time. It's just a really unique shade. Nothing in my collection looks like this. I also really love the Physicians Formula Dewy Blush Elixirs. These don't last quite as long as some other ones that I love, like the Juicy Pang, but I do really love them. If you don't have access to these ones and you just want to pick something up at the drugstore, this thing is worth a try. It is really pretty. I have the shade Gorgeous Peach. Very pretty, juicy, liquidy blush. There it is right there. And then lastly, the Kosas Blush Duo. This one's in the shade 8th Muse. This is such a pretty kind of cool toned pink shade. I really love this color, especially when I'm doing a more cool toned kind of look. And then there's loads more that I still want to try. I am planning to pick up some more of the Juicy Pangs very soon. I want to try out the MAC ones. If you guys have any other recommendations for cream or liquid blushes, leave them down below because this is definitely one of my greatest discoveries of the last year. And that's not just talking about blushes, that's just in general. The next category is the most practical blushes. And for this one, I'm going to go with the Persona blushes. I really love these blushes. They are beautiful. They are practical because they are nice and sleek packaging, but also the colors of these are just very practical. They have just two colors so far, a very perfect peach and a very perfect kind of slightly cooler tone pink. So this is the shade Georgia. Such a pretty formula, very smoothing, kind of satin-like. I wouldn't say it's shimmery, but it's also a little bit more than a matte. This one right here is the shade Carmel. One of those shades that kind of goes with anything. This shade reminds me a little bit of Melba. I think I've said this before. It's definitely not a dupe, but just the way that it looks and what it goes with is very similar to Melba. It's just like a nice pink that's not too warm or too cool. It's just very, very neutral. They're so easy to store and travel with, and they're the type of blushes that if you could only have two blushes in your collection, you could definitely get by with just these two, and they would go with any look that you could ever create. Next up is the least practical blush. This is another one that I did just declutter, but I'm going to mention it now because it's kind of still in my collection. I mean, it's not. It's sitting in a bin next to me for people to rummage through. But I have to go with this right here. This is a blush palette by Wander Beauty. This is their blush and highlighter palette. This came in a BoxyCharm last year, I believe. I honestly have not even used every shade inside here because what I find so difficult and not practical about this is the size of the pans inside here. I don't quite understand why these came in the sizes they did when they are meant to mainly be blushes. I think the idea behind this thing is that you can use it as a blush or on your eyes, but even with that idea, which is a nice idea, I wish they would have just shortened these up and widened them out just a little bit. That way you could get not just your eyeshadow brushes in here, but also your blush brushes. I don't know that I own a blush brush in my collection that can comfortably fit inside these pans. This is one of those situations where I'm not a huge packaging snob. I don't usually get too hung up about packaging, but this was one of those situations where packaging just kind of went wrong. Like, this just doesn't work for me. At least the type of blush brushes I like to use. Perhaps if you use something smaller and kind of angled like this, which I don't. I don't really like blush brushes like that. I like my blush brushes to be a little bit larger and fluffier, so they don't fit in here without me kind of pinching them and going kind of sideways, which that's just too much trouble for me. I'll grab something else instead. So I really did not get any use out of this at all because of the very impractical packaging. The next category is my most expensive blush, and for this one I'm going to go with this right here. This is the Hourglass Ambient Lighting Edit Ghost Palette. I know this is a palette and not technically a blush, but I'm including it today because I mainly reach into this palette for the blushes in here. They are kind of the standouts of this whole palette, and I have talked a little bit about my semi-ambivalent feelings about this palette and the size of the pans and the price that you pay for this thing. This entire palette is $80, which is, I can't believe I spent $80 on this thing, even though I do think the powders are really beautiful. But this palette is my first try of the the Hourglass blushes. I do have one of their bronzers, but this was my first try of their blushes, and I really, really love these. Now, if I could go back, rather than spend the $80 in this, I think I would just get a full size of one or both of these blushes, or even one of the blushes and one of the bronzers. I just don't get a lot of use out of these powders on the top. I mean, I will dip into them when I open this palette, but what I go to this palette for is for the blushes specifically, and maybe the bronzer. I know that was a bit of a tangent, but I want to mention this today because I would happily own the full size of the blush of one of these. I do think it's a really good formula. It's very smooth and sheer and brightening on the cheeks. It looks very natural. It has the perfect amount of sheen to it that just sits so beautifully on top of the skin. And although this isn't necessarily just a blush, if we were to break it down per ounce, these would most definitely be the most expensive blushes in my collection. For my least expensive blushes, this one was very easy. It has to be the Essence blushes. Honestly, nothing really even comes close to these. I have a lot of affordable blushes in my collection, a lot of which I love, but $2.99, I honestly don't know how they do that. I mean, nothing even comes close in price to what these cost, which makes me all the more shocked that these can be such a great formula. They last really well. They look beautiful on the skin. They're really pretty colors. I only wish that they would come out with a larger color range. These are just incredible. They are beautiful. I can't fathom how they can make these perfect little blushes and sell them for just $2.99 and not lose all kinds of money. But for anyone that is on a budget, you're getting a great blush at a very, very good price. So those are all the questions for the original blush tag, but Emily Noel did add a couple more, and I wanted to add my take on these two bullet points as well. First one being the most long-wearing blush, and for that I'm going to go with the Kosas Blush Duo. There's something very interesting about this formula. It's a cream, obviously, but it kind of sets or locks down. I can't really explain it. It's not like a set to a powder finish, but it really does set in place and it stays all day on my cheeks. It's really incredible. I really, really love this blush. It's one of the ones I reach for when I have a long night or a long day. I need my blush to really last for a long time. It's by far one of my most long-wearing blushes. And the last category she included was Best Blush Palette. Now, I don't own a lot of blush palettes, but I do have one blush palette that I absolutely am in love with, and it's got to be the Alamar Cosmetics palette. This is the light version. This came in BoxyCharm last year, and this is such a pretty one. I love the colors that are included inside here. You get this center shade, which is a very good neutral blush for someone with a lighter or fair skin tone, and then you get these kind of orangey peach shades, which are so much fun and so pretty. Very nice satiny formula, nice sleek packaging. I love traveling with this thing. One of you suggested that I try out the medium palette as well, that one is beautiful. I know they have a couple different shade options, which I think is amazing that they have tailored something for every skin tone out there. And just having 3 different shades in one little sleek package is just really, really convenient. And that, you guys, is everything. That is it for the blush tag from 2016. This was so much fun. It was so fun to go through my collection and see which blushes I like for different reasons. I hope that you guys enjoyed it as well. If you have an answer to one of these that stands out, be sure to leave it down in the comments below. I'd love to hear from you guys. Thank you all so much for stopping by. One more reminder to subscribe before you leave. And that's all I have for you guys today. Have a good one, and I will see you in my next video. Bye. Channel, of course. That was primer infused shimmer brush parties and my skids. Mandy, I am struggling today. The 3 shades I have are Melba. What was this called? My mind just went totally blank. Margin. Sometimes I just like go like tangent, 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 and then what was I talking about?